Well, good evening. This is Hound Dog Steve coming to you on the 10th of March. And President Emanuel Macron, wow, does he ever like to put things down to pen and paper. Anyway, a warm welcome to all of you returning to my channel, and to anyone new here this evening, please comment, like and subscribe, and please be part of the conversation. It's great to have you here. Okay, so this letter that Emmanuel Macron has just penned is a warning to Europe and a call for a renaissance within Europe of the bold idea of globalism that is taking place. And the reason I like these letters, Macron is just wonderful at this. He just loves to write things down. And I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but Sigmund Freud, the great psychiatrist, psychologist, discovered within all of us what they call the subconscious desire to confess. And that confession tends to come out in the words that we use, our actions, that kind of thing. And so my father, who was a police officer, said that sometimes he'd be walking down the street and all of a sudden some guy would just jump into a doorway. Why would you jump into a doorway? And that is how the subconscious desire to confess works by and large. But it can be very subtle. It can be leaving a clue. In fact, the entirety of police investigation is predicated on this idea that part of you wants to confess. In all of us wants to confess our sins. To a psychiatry and psychoanalytic work, where people, again, their work revolves around the fact that people want to tell their story, want to tell what's going on inside of them. And so when Macron writes these letters, where if you read between the lines or you listen to just some of the ways that he phrases things, it gives you a really good indication as to the underlying meaning of this kind of stuff. And also the cognitive dissonance. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. And as we go through this letter, I don't want to take too long on this introduction because it's quite a long letter. Not hugely long, but it's long enough. And and I would put some pictures in there. Most of the things that he's talking about in there, like democracy and so on and so forth, are demonstrably untrue. They're actually, he's got 40,000 people every weekend out on the streets throughout Paris and France protesting his presidency. And he's talking about a glorious renaissance. I think you need to deal with some of these underlying problems because they're not going to go away until they're seriously addressed. And as I stressed several times in other videos, I don't think there is any real desire to address these problems because as far as these elitist leaders are concerned, there is no problem. And these are just obstacles in their goal to have absolute control over absolutely everything. And you can see that. You can see that in the way they behave. That's the way they want to go. Okay, so let's flip over to this letter and I'll talk you through that, and we'll pick out some interesting bits, and then we'll come back and I'll do a quick wrap-up. Okie dokie, here we go. From The Guardian. Dear Europe, Brexit is a lesson for all of us. It's time for renewal. We can't let nationalists exploit public anger. I want an ambitious project that lets the people really take back control. Citizens of Europe, if I'm taking the liberty of addressing you directly, it is not only in the name of the history and values that unite us, but because time is of the essence. A few weeks from now, the European elections will be decisive for the future of our continent. Never since the Second World War has Europe been so essential, yet never has Europe been in so much danger. Ooh. Brexit stands as a symbol of that. It symbolizes the crisis of a Europe that has failed to respond to its people's need for protection from the major shocks of the modern world. That's inflation and loss of jobs is what he's referring to there. It also symbolizes the European trap. The trap lies in not being part of the European Union. The trap is in the lie and the irresponsibility that can destroy it. And that lie would be populism. Because in the globalist world, you can't have another opinion. Who told the British the truth about their post-Brexit future? Who spoke to them about losing access to the EU market? Who mentioned the risks of peace in Ireland of restoring the border? Retreating into nationalism offers nothing. It is a rejection without an alternative. And this is the trap that threatens the whole of Europe, and anger mongers backed by fake news promise anything and everything. Which is pretty much what the globalists have done. They're promising you anything and everything. And who told you that Brexit was going to be a disaster? How do you know? You who can't even run your own economy properly, you're telling England that they are going to be in trouble through Brexit? Your entire banking system is in a state of collapse. And here we are, China.org, ECB to keep interest rates unchanged at least through end of 2019. And Mario Draghi is about to start the TLTRO3, which will start in September 2019, which is basically quantitative easing by another name. So, in other words, they're buying up bonds and they're printing all kinds of cash to bail out the banks in Europe that are in a state of collapse. We have to stand firm, proud and lucid in the face of this manipulation and say, first of all, what Europe is. It is a historic success. The reconciliation of a devastated continent is an unprecedented project of peace, prosperity and freedom. Okay, take a look at the police on the street trying to herd your citizenry because they don't have enough money to pay their bills. And the shutting down of the internet. Let us never forget that, and this project continues to protect us today. What country can act on its own in the face of aggressive strategies by the major powers? Who can claim to be sovereign on their own in the face of the digital giants? Are you talking about sovereignty? All of these countries in the EU have lost their sovereignty. So it's too late, isn't it? Now you want to be a sovereign Europe. Oh, I understand. How would we resist the crisis of financial capitalism without the euro, which is a force for the entire EU? Well, of course, and you can see that the entire EU is bankrupt. Europe is also those thousands of projects daily that have changed the face of our regions. The schools refurbished, the road rebuilt, and the long-awaited arrival of high-speed internet access. Not the ghettos, of course. This struggle is a daily commitment because Europe, like peace, can never be taken for granted. I pursue it tirelessly on behalf of France in order to take Europe forward and to defend its model. We have shown that things that were told were unattainable. The creation of a European defense capability. An army, you mean? And the protection of social rights were in fact possible. And I guess that's why people are camped up all up and down the Champs-Élysées because they're homeless. Yet we need to do more and faster because there is another trap, the trap of the status quo and resignation. Faced with major crises in the world, citizens often asked, what is Europe? What is Europe doing? To them it has become a soulless market. And if you ask all the mum and pop stores that you put out of business through over-regulation, yes, it has become a soulless market. And it seems to me that anybody who's got any complaint at all is just not listened to. They just get pushed away to one side, fall through the cracks. And I would actually argue in today's world of technological growth that we are far from the trap of the status quo and resignation. In fact, we are redesigning ourselves by the day because we're now in high-speed contact with each other, and a contact that you want to shut down through Article 13 and Article 11. Yet Europe is not just an economic market, it is a project. A market is useful, but it should not detract from the need for borders to protect our values that unite us. Border? Did I hear you say borders? I thought you didn't like borders. Nationalists are misguided when they claim to defend our identity by withdrawing from the EU, because it is European civilization that unites, frees and protects us. And so that's why all these people in all these countries have lost most of their sovereignty, and you want borders, but the nationalists are wrong because they want borders around their own individual countries to protect them from the onslaught of globalism at the request of their citizenry. But those who would change nothing are also misguided because they deny the fear felt by our people, the doubts that undermine our democracies. We are at a pivotal moment for our continent, a moment when together we need to politically and culturally reinvent the shape of our civilization in a changing world. And what they mean by that, that's code for to take away any kind of grassroots cultural history that you or your country might have or may be attached to. And I don't think that it's backward thinking to recognize that we have a past as well as a present and a future. And so what they're asking you to do is to completely give up your past and to buy into this whole global network that they are creating. And he's right. This is a pivotal moment because the cat is out of the bag and we now see what globalism really means. Now is the time for a European renaissance, hence resisting the temptation of isolation and division. I propose we build this renewal together around three ambitions: freedom, protection, and progress. Sounds like Ingsoc, doesn't it? Defending our freedom. The European model is based on freedom of people, diversity of opinions, and creation. Our first freedom is democratic freedom, the freedom to choose our leaders as foreign powers seek to influence our votes at every election. Now, of course, we're finding out through these data companies like Cambridge Analytica that it's actually our governments that are manipulating the internet, whether it be foreign governments or domestic governments. It is not the people who are the problem. It is the governments and the big powers and the big money that are manipulating the media. You know, the individual citizen, you try and get a letter printed in the paper, and you're lucky to do that. They wouldn't print an article from you and I, but all of the stuff in the paper, oh yes, just like SNC Lavalin can phone the Prime Minister's office and there you go, it's answered right away. But you and I, oh no. So you have to remember who these people are talking about when they talk about these kind of things. In this same spirit of independence, we should also ban the funding of European political parties by foreign powers. We should have European rules banishing incitement to hatred and violence from the internet, since respect for the individual is the bedrock of our civilization and our dignity. And that explains why your police are firing flash bombs, taking out people's eyes, blowing people's hands off, firing tear gas and spraying pepper spray in your citizens. These are your citizens, sir. Protecting our continent. Oh, here we're going to get down to it. Founded on internal reconciliation, the EU has forgotten the realities of the world. Yet no community can create a sense of belonging if it does not have protected territorial limits. Oh, well, isn't that what the nationalists want? Protected territorial limits? The boundary is freedom in security. There you go, there's 1984. Freedom in security. We therefore need to rethink the Schengen area. All of those who want to be part of it should comply with obligations of responsibility. See, should comply with obligations of responsibility. Well, that really sounds like freedom to me. Stringent border controls, woo, and solidarity. A single asylum policy with common acceptance and refusal rules. We will need a common border force and a European Asylum Office, strict control obligations and European solidarity, which each country will contribute under the authority of a European Council for Internal Security. On migration, I believe in a Europe that protects both its values and its borders. Now you see, each country will have to contribute to another whole bureaucratic layer to keep all of those countries secure, when actually they were pretty secure before the European Union happened. Yes, they may have been bumbling on. Yes, they were making mistakes, but the people by and large were happy and things were working. There was cross-border traffic and people were trading with each other. The same standards should apply to defense. Substantial progress has been made in the last 2 years, but we need to set a clear course. A treaty on defense and security should define our fundamental obligations in association with NATO and our European allies. Increased defense spending, a truly operational mutual defense clause, and a European Security Council with the UK on board to prepare our collective decisions. See, already they're talking about the UK being on board. Are we going to see a stalled Brexit, like a never exit or a never Brexit? Our borders need to guarantee fair competition, and that's where you put all the mom and pop stores out of business through over-regulation that only corporations can afford to pay for. What countries in the world would continue to trade with those who respect none of their rules? I wonder. We cannot suffer in silence. We need to reform our competition policy and reshape our trade policy, penalizing or banning businesses that compromise our strategic interests and fundamental values such as environmental standards, data protection, and fair payment of taxes, and the adoption of European preference in strategic industries and our public procurement as our American and Chinese competitors do. Well, you're sounding like Donald Trump, my friend. Recover the spirit of progress. Europe is not a second-tier power. Europe in its entirety is a vanguard. It has always defined the standards of progress. In this, it needs to drive forward a project of convergence rather than competition. Europe, where social security was created, needs to introduce a social shield for all workers, guaranteeing the same pay for the same work, and an EU minimum wage, appropriate to each country, negotiated collectively every year. Now, I kind of did a double take when I saw this because, on the one hand, he's talking about let's get rid of all the borders and we're all going to be chummy and friends alike and so on and so forth. But when it comes to an EU minimum wage, appropriate to each country, negotiated collectively every year. And this was the problem that happened when they turned over to the euro, was essentially, I don't know whether this was planned or intended, but what happened was overnight when the euro was introduced, the wages in each country basically remained static, even though they were paid in euros. However, the prices on goods went up to the same level playing field as Paris was on. So everybody's cost of living really went through the roof almost immediately. And so I just find it kind of interesting that, oh yes, we need to drop the borders and get along together. But now when it comes to sharing the money, oh no. We have to make it appropriate to each country and negotiate it collectively every year. Getting back on track also means spearheading the environmental cause. Will we be able to look our children in the eye if we do not also clear our climate debt? The EU needs to set its target, zero carbon by 2050 and pesticides hard by 2025, and adapt its policies according with such measures as a European climate bank to finance the ecological transition, a European food safety force to improve our food controls and to counter the lobby threat, independent scientific assessment of substances hazardous to the environment and health. This imperative needs to guide all our action, from the Central Bank to the European Commission, from the European budget to the investment plan for Europe. All our institutions need to have the climate as their mandate. And of course that is a very commendable, lofty goal, but as we have seen in Canada, there is no way that we can reach any of our targets. They are just too severe, and the economy just can't stand the hit, which is why other countries too are balking, like China. China is not on board with the Paris Accord. Progress and freedom are about being able to live from one's work. Europe needs to look ahead to create jobs. This is why it needs not only to regulate the digital giants by putting in place European supervision of the major digital platforms, prompt penalties for unfair competition, transparent algorithms, etc., but also to finance innovation by giving the new European Innovation Council a budget on a par with the United States in order to spearhead new technological breakthroughs such as artificial intelligence. Oh, so that you can steal more jobs. Europe needs to regulate the digital giants, so you're putting in place Article 13 and Article 11, which will basically choke the internet so thoroughly that you will kill all innovation and all small creators and website builders and so on and so forth. I mean, it's just, how can you even say that? This is what I'm talking about with cognitive dissonance. A world-oriented Europe needs to look to Africa. Yep. Well, you've done that, and look what damage you did there with Chad and Biafra and Libya. The list is endless, you're meddling in Africa, with which we should enter into a covenant for the future, ambitiously and non-defensively supporting African development with investment, academic partnership, and education for girls. And it's kind of interesting. One of the things that strikes me about this letter is, you've only just thought of this now that the pressure's on, now that you see people on the streets. It's now that you have decided that it's time to support African development, when you have probably been, along with the other big colonizers, I'll add that, have been probably the biggest hindrance to African development. And this is actually why China has been so welcomed there, is because they truly are partnering with places like Zimbabwe in return for good farmland. Putting trains in, adding infrastructure and this kind of stuff. Things that you could have done years and years and years ago but didn't. Freedom, protection and progress. We need to build European renewal on these pillars. Freedom. Say again, Article 13, Article 11. We can't let nationalists with no solutions exploit people's anger. Well, the question is, why are the people angry? Not why are the nationalists exploiting the anger, why are they angry? And are you going to exploit that anger? We can't sleepwalk to a diminished Europe. We can't remain in the routine of business as usual and wishful thinking, which is exactly what they're doing because it's taken you so long to respond to the LFS. European humanism demands action, and everywhere people are standing up to be part of that change. Yep, that's right. And you've called these people thugs, terrorists, racists, backward thinkers, anti-patriots, everything you can think of. These are your people, my friend. So by the end of the year, let's set up with representatives of the EU institutions and member states a conference for Europe in order to propose all the changes our political project needs, which is open even to amending the EU treaties. This conference will need to engage with citizens' panels and hear from academics, business and workers' representatives, as well as religious and spiritual leaders. It will define a roadmap for the EU that translates these key priorities into concrete actions. But is it better to have a static Europe, or a Europe that advances, sometimes at different speeds, and that is open to all? In this Europe, the people will really take back control of their future. Well, how can they when you shut down the internet through Article 13 and Article 11, and you stopped anyone who has a contrary narrative by defining it as hate speech and anti-EU? I mean, it's so in-your-face atrocious, it's unbelievable. In this Europe, UK, I'm sure, will find its true place. The Brexit impasse is a lesson for us all. We need to escape this trap and make the forthcoming elections and our project meaningful. It is for you to decide whether Europe and the values of progress that it embodies are to be more than just a passing episode in history. This is the choice I put to you, that together we should chart the road to European renewal. Well, I think you should check in with Matteo Salvini and Italy on that one, and you may want to check in with your banking system also. And that is penned personally by Emanuel Macron, the President of France. Project Syndicate 2019. Okay, so I think you can clearly see that the hubris involved here is absolutely staggering. And of course, it's kind of interesting, as I said, about the call to arms and a security force, and how he wants to break down all the borders within Europe, and yet he goes on to defend the border around Europe. I mean, you can't have it both ways, buddy. The contradictions are just glaring all the way through. And so, I think we can take this as a bit of an indication, a bit of a window into this man's mind. And of course, you can see it just swings backwards and forwards from being aggressively assertive to pleading. My personal appraisal of Emmanuel Macron is that he is a very weak leader, and in a moment of pressure, or moments of pressure, he will back down, he will collapse, because he is not mentally strong enough to withstand the kind of insults and pressure that he's being put on his own sense of self. It's creating a sense of doubt, and you can see, because even whilst the early days of the Yellow Vest protests were going on, he went into hiding. And it was about the fourth or fifth week after they began to realize that these were going to be an ongoing issue that he came out of hiding, and then, makes a statement from the Palais of Versailles, from King Louis XVI's writing desk, all gold and opulence, trying to pretend that he is one of the regular people of France. And of course we are starting to recognize these glaring contradictions in the story, and the story is undoubtedly throughout the world beginning to crack, show a little tarnish and fraying around the edges, because as I said in my last video, when I listed all the things that globalism have brought us in the last 50 years, it's been a disaster. In fact, it's been one disaster after another. It's sheer luck that we have reached this far without everything just being completely torn apart by this shifting of labor from one side of the world to another, and taking away jobs en masse of the general public and expecting them to survive in an inflationary world on less wages. I mean, come on, you've got to be kidding. You should have known at some point there was going to be a riot on the street over that. Did the Arab Spring mean anything to you in Egypt? By golly, just that was over the price of wheat rising 70 cents a bushel or something. I forget exactly what it was now. So these situations are very fluid. Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see how the summer unfolds, and of course this weekend coming up is week 18, Act 18, sorry, and that is ultimatum. The town hall meetings will be done. I don't know whether they will reach any real conclusion. I suspect not. It will be filled with platitudes and years of committee meetings to try and resolve, unworkable goals. It'll be tenuous, it'll be horrible, and at the end of the day, it won't really do anything, because that's what it's designed to do. Create lots and lots and lots of paperwork and lots of activity, and absolutely no results whatsoever. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe below. And in the meantime, this is Hound Dog Steve signing off and wishing you a great week coming up, and we will talk to you very, very soon. See you now. Bye.